Good evening everyone, welcome to the Appeals and Standards Committee Annual General Meeting. Right, on the agenda tonight then, we've got first issue is the minutes of last year's meeting, which was held on the 5th of June 2018. Are you happy that I sign those as a correct copy of what took place then?
Agreed.
Good. Sign those. Okay, item number 2 then, apologies for absence.
Apologies received from Councillor Eden and from Roger Lowe.
Okay, thank you. And item 3, declaration of members' interests. No declarations. Moving straight on then to item number 4, the annual review of standards of conduct and complaints handling. Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, the annual meeting and the annual review, it is good to touch base on what's going on. We might need to think about our committee membership in due course. It is good to have more continued, but I wouldn't be worried about that because obviously the reports and the minutes are available to other members in particular. And what's suggested in the report are some matters such as the key messages, which will take some of the content and publicise it where it needs to be. So I'll come back to those in due course. So if I take you through, if you're happy, as per usual, this will be our demonstration of what we've done to promote high standards, and the committee has a role, just as I have a role as monitoring officer, to do that, to promote high standards. And as you know, we do that not only for the district council, which we're obliged to do, but we do it for the parishes and town council, because that's what we've chosen to do. And they seem to appreciate that as well. But the purpose of the review is to see, okay, does anything need to change? And are there procedures that need to change, given any hearings and the like? Which has been interesting in one way, so we'll come back to that as well. But if I just deal with the national context first, you recall in the past we've talked about whether the government's going to review matters, and sanctions has always been an issue, and we promised to review sanctions, but nothing's happened for a few years. But this year, and maybe the government was waiting, but it didn't say so, but this year, the Committee on Standards in Public Life, which is the main body that looks at standards in the public sector as a whole, has produced a report. And it picks up many of the issues that have been raised over the years that have been a concern since the Localism Act came in and took down the standards regime, as some would say. What the committee has done is produced a report which brought out the recommendations and the best practice suggestions, and they're in the appendix, and I'll, in due course, if I may, turn to those best practice suggestions. But what we don't know is what will happen with that report. It goes to Cabinet Office, see what they want to do with it. As you may have noticed, there are a few things going on nationally at the moment, which might make this not quite the highest priority. Yeah. But it won't go away, I don't think. The committee is pretty good at keeping on about stuff like this, so I don't think it will go away. It's a case of perhaps timing. And I would have thought that there might be more of an appetite nowadays for actually just revisiting what was put in as a replacement for the old standards regime. And a couple of points that I've highlighted at the top of page 9 there about the power of suspension. It's quite an interesting one, and the model code of conduct. So it seems to be something that's happening nationally is sensible to do. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay. There's what I've done in the report, the recommendations from the committee, they're mostly for government to consider, none for the councils, and we'll see what happens with them. The best practice suggestions, we can decide to do something with that now if we wish, and it didn't conflict with anything legally. So we'll look at those in due course, and I'll do that at the end of my lecture. Okay, so more locally, we've continued between us, so that can be Catherine, myself, other colleagues, Tony Gillett when he deputises. We continue to have contact from councils, members, officers, clerks, and we continue to try and handle those best we can and guide them along the way. And we think that's quite important to help make sure we get the right approach to governance in this district. And it generally is pretty good. So that's one flavour I want to get across. And we link with NCAL, as I've mentioned here, and that relationship is still very good. And I can sometimes informally try and seek a procedural change, for example, at parish council. I don't need to do it publicly, I can just work behind the scenes with Danny, and we can see if we get some improvement. And we've done that a couple of times this year. But one of the things it's useful to do in terms of contact and encourage contact, and people know they can contact, is to make sure we get the important things like the register of interests up to date. And we've seen a few more entries and changes this year, because we did push it a bit more in the key messages, and I think that'd be wise to do again. But the point about the procedural concerns a couple of parish councils, and it's only a couple of parish councils, it is something that in part reflects, okay, maybe there are procedures, but maybe also a degree of challenge to the authority of some people trying to run the meetings. And that's happened in a couple of complaints cases, for example, where actually the member's been a little bit untoward, shall we say, and unnecessarily keeping it ongoing. But a simple procedural point, for example, this council has procedures which say if a member disrupts the meeting, is asked to refrain. If he continues or she continues, asked to leave and be expected to leave. Some parish councils don't have that, and maybe they ought to. It's that sort of simple thing, if you like. So sometimes it's a matter of just up-to-date governance. Mystery shopping. We had a visit to one parish this year. It was a parish that was causing us some issues, and I don't name the parishes deliberately, but it was causing us some issues and was having a bit of an internal fight. There were some changes. We asked the mystery shopper to go along and to make observations as to what happened. The feedback was generally positive as to how things were being handled. And for me, there's a point about a fair chairman and an efficient clerk. And that would be the ideal everywhere. Yeah, of course, you're going to get exceptions to that. And sometimes that does cause a few of the issues. But we also had the intention of having a mystery shopper at DDC's Board Council meeting. I think that was something that was resolved last year to be had. And we lined up one of the independent members, but unfortunately that member resigned just ahead, and we didn't rearrange it. So we're going to continue with it for next year, and we programmed it for next year along with some other parish councils if you agree to that mystery shopping continue, which you'll see in the advice. We think that's worth doing, and each year there are one or two councils that give you some issues, and you do want to go back and just see how things have moved on, because if you intervene, you'd like to think things have improved. So that's one element. Now, one of the main features, as we know in this council, and the public will be aware of as well, is the prospect of local government reorganisation. And that's partly got in the way of some of the work that's been going on, and to some extent that's affected what was also expected to happen, which was the learning and development session on the code of conduct. And what I'd planned to do was to not just focus on our code of conduct, but given the transitions to new authorities, were there going to be any particular differences that needed to be highlighted, or different expectations, for example. Now, as you know, we expected that announcement last year, not this year. We got it in May this year, and we expect the order to go to Parliament, we're told, around about October, November time. That's ultimately the words they used, let's say October, November time. And I'm planning to have that session in that time, because for me it is appropriate to ensure this is genuinely going through. It really does look like it, but laying the order will tell us something. So I'm looking for that to be a good cue, and it'll be very topical in the minds of members then. They look for the theory to be there before Parliament, because one can assume it will go through Parliament. So that's penciled in. The key messages I've part mentioned already. I want to do that again. I'm picking up the topics that are in this report, and I'll come on to those topics in a minute. So we think that's a good idea to do. So on the back of what's happened this year, I don't see a need to review the code of conduct that we have, or the supplementary code. It seems to be working. We'll see later when I look at the committee's suggestions, there are a few things we can do better in terms of publicity, but in terms of the codes themselves, I'm comfortable with that. It seems to be working well. This authority has a good record of having a fairly robust code of conduct. It was a lighter touch than originally under the previous regime, but it's still quite an extensive one, and it seems to work. So I think it's fit for our purpose, and the good thing is 51 of the 53 parishes seem to like it as well. And the other two I'm not worried about, it's not an issue. We mentioned in the top of page 11 about the shadow code of conduct. See what happens with that. Dispensations, this year there's been one from DDC member, and that was granted. I don't know necessarily what happens at parishes. And one of the things I want to put in the messages is to encourage them to let us know, because we would like to put them on the register. They're not needed to be as such, but it would be wise so the public can see, well, why is he speaking on that? Because he's got an interest in that. Well, it might be because he had a dispensation. Otherwise that recording, unless you look through all the minutes. So we want to include that in the messages. Sensitive interest. This is quite an interesting one as well. There's a category in the Act where certain interests can be judged to be kept away from the public register because there's a threat of harm in particular. And so that is something I have to determine. And I like to keep the threshold high, and I need evidence to back any request up, because society is what it is, and it does seem to have changed somewhat. But at the end of the day, members are in the public eye, and the public expect to know about their members in many ways. So
what would you expect as an example of a sensitive nature? Perhaps somebody who was not wanting a past partner to know where they were?
There can be that.
But I mean, obviously, you probably wouldn't go forward as a district councillor if that was a big issue.
Possibly, but that can happen. It can be that you're worried about your address because, for example, you're a magistrate. So there's been some guidance to magistrates recently. Again, unfortunately reflecting society these days, and we can think of some of the publicity today yesterday about some of the comments made on the radio by a comedian. I won't name the comedian. It's that sort of language that somehow entices people to do something akin to that, and you think, whoa, and that's the worry that is around there. So I'm wondering if that might increase. So I've had that this year, and it's not the first year we've had concerns about threat of harm from people in certain positions. Okay. In terms of the topics, interests are often what people contact me about. They want to know, the member or the clerk wants to check for the member whether they should be declared interest at a meeting, perhaps the next day. That can happen. But we give the advice as much as we can. And that helps with that registration of interest. I give some general advice as well. And the complaints tend to illustrate what the topics can be about. And sometimes it's about, as I said earlier, the procedures. Why did they declare interest on that? What I've found is a topic, and I've highlighted here at the bottom of the page, about neighbourhood planning. That tends to work in different ways in the parishes, and sometimes the formality is not quite there as it should be in terms of their handling of what are ultimately important documents. Once we ultimately decide what to do with them, the gestation is through the parishes in most cases, and they shouldn't be having meetings, if you like, with simple language behind closed doors. There should be ways of actually being able to properly engage in that. But we don't legislate for that, of course. That's not for us to deal with. That's the parish councils to consider. What does come through is a key topic as well, and it's something that I've said earlier, and will no doubt be picked up by Cabinet Office at some point. It's the complainants keep wanting to have the stronger sanctions. Not because they know what's already able to be done, they don't. That's their problem, if you like. They call for suspension or whatever, and I have to go back to, that's actually not allowed. So what's the problem? And to get that sort of response. So it's a frustration on all parts, to be honest. We ourselves, as a group, I think have said that in the past. It needs to be a bit stronger than it is now. Okay. So in terms of those complaints, we've had 11 during the year. I like a low level, as long as it's not a camouflage for a design not to report for whatever reason. So whilst I've just given you the illustration of, well, what's the point? That's usually after they've complained.
So they're complaining.
So I've still got a complaint to deal with, but you don't know whether complaints will continue. But that said, I don't get a real sense of issues around the place. And in this council, I can see more of what we do, of course, and I don't have those issues here. And it's been a good year for the district council. There haven't been any complaints about district council members. So nearly all the complaints I've had to deal with have required no further action. And there was one there that did require some further action, and I commissioned an investigation. And we always do an external investigation because I think that's only fair. I mean, I could do it myself, or I could delegate an officer in the council to do it, but I don't like to do that. I want it independent. And that was commissioned because there was a doubt over a planning matter, and it was a neighbourhood planning matter. But the investigator concluded that there hadn't been a failure in the balance of probabilities, and the case was closed accordingly, and duly involved the independent person. So low volume is good. I'd like to think that will continue. The common themes I've identified about disrespect, failure to disclose interests, disclosure of confidential information, and sometimes this all wraps up into various allegations of use of position properly or bringing disrepute on the council, that sort of thing. But disrespect is increasing. From what I've seen, on the basis of a low volume, it does seem to be increasing a bit, and it just kind of reflects what's going on perhaps in the world or in our society anyway. And I do feel my age at this point in saying things like that. I'm knocking on a bit of myself. Okay. But what I also highlighted is that some of this stuff is about inter-councillor relationships. It's not actually with the public necessarily all the time. And for me, that is, you've got to sort it out between you guys. You've been elected, sort it out between you. And I try to encourage that. And what I do is I do quite a full decision notice. A lot of colleagues, function officers, they don't do decision notices, so you've had redacted versions. I just think it's good practice. I think it's appropriate. I think it's what you would expect if you're a customer, to actually have some idea of the reasoning as to why something's not happening. But I know some colleagues, they just issue no further action. Personally, don't like it. So I want to continue to do that. I think it's helpful. And I have, as you know, circulated the redacted versions. Again, we want to do that next year as well. And deliberately take out the names of the councillors and the parish councils. I think you appreciate why. And hopefully it doesn't result in too much black and redacted. I'm conscious when I see it, I get all these blacked out text. And I think it gives you more of the flavour than you would see from the schedule, which is the other item. Okay, but inter-councillor relationships, just a little bit concerning at the moment. And I want to work with NCAP Chief Exec in particular to try and address that and give support to the likes of the chairman and the clerk. Because I think there's some issues there. Okay. In one of the DE complaints, there's been a challenge post the decision. Some people are grumpy when they get a decision notice, it's not got my name on it. But it's got a reasoning. But there's one who's has taken it to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman's having a look at that. So I'll wait to see the outcome of that. The Ombudsman's dealt with that, 2 cases like that in the past, and said there's no role for myself as Ombudsman, because there's no appeal against the decision of Montrose. And we can have that kind of arrangement, that's allowed from the localist now. But it might be the Ombudsman's going to look at a different angle in terms of the communication of that decision, for example. So slightly different from the assessment as opposed to the delivery of that assessment. But we'll wait to see what the Ombudsman does, and I will report back to the committee in due course on that. Okay. The other element this year, very unusual, but we did have...
Sorry, can I just ask a question? The grounds for going to the Ombudsman were to do with not accepting the decision and the terms of the notice. Was there anything in there that contained any substance other than it being a gripe about being dissatisfied about the result not going their way? Was there anything?
I think it's what's unusual about that complainant in that case is a disability. And I think that's the dimension that's being considered, if you like, through the Ombudsman. So going back to the delivery. Also kind of links back to the assessment on back of the information that was provided. Now what we say, and it doesn't matter about ability or disability, is provide the information that you think I need to rely on to make an initial assessment. Is there something in this that's worthy of some further action? And that can be delivered in various means. And in this case, I can tell you this without revealing who, etc., that we facilitated the exchange of that information, the supply of that information to us, by telephone handling of that, rather than a form being filled in, which is what most people normally do. But seemingly that's not been sufficient for that person, perhaps post the decision. They were not happy about that.
I mean, what struck me about this particular case was that it seemed to hinge, or part of it was raised, was a fraud issue.
Yes.
Or an alleged fraud issue. And I've got the disability side for something I haven't got knowledge on, but I just wondered if they were pursuing that in any way or using that as an example of where they felt the thing was.
It's a complicated case in some ways because it links with some other challenges that are going on what to do with this council. So I don't say too much about that, but because I wouldn't want to be unfair to either party, and that's the only reason for saying that. But perhaps it was evident that in this case the process was being followed to a degree because it suited one party to have a conclusion in the way they thought it might go. I don't care what other process is going on, as long as I'm not breaching any of the rules for that process. I would just look at it based on the information that's provided, based on what I can also do a bit of desktop research on, which I can do separately. So I can check with the clerk about minutes, for example, and things like that. But I would just deal with it as a case in itself, under our rules, as per the Localism Act in respect to standards, and make a judgment on the assessment stage. I don't conclude whether someone did or did not breach the code of conduct. I talk about probability and the public interest and the rest of it. And in that case I was able to determine it quite reasonably, I think, and quite clearly. I don't think the outcome was likely.
I thought your decision letter was very thorough and seemed to cover a great deal of the number of points, and I was surprised that there were issues in there that could have been picked out to have been taken to the Ombudsman for appeal.
Yeah. And the Ombudsman maybe look at it another angle too, the delivery side of it, but we'll see.
Yeah, thank you.
But the unusual element this year perhaps was a hearing in respect of an employee's appeal, which is only where numbers get wrong. Chairman, you were involved in that?
I was involved in that, yes, yeah. As was.
And you were
Councillor Howard as well.
Right, thank you. Yeah. So you can probably speak better on this, because I don't get involved in that, because that's handled by the staff of the council, as you know. So there was a hearing panel. I update, no, not update, this as per this actually. There was no challenge to the decision made by the panel, and the expiry period has expired for that challenge. The feedback I had from colleagues was that it seemed to have worked effectively and fairly, and also from, I think, I'm trying to think who else told me, who I wouldn't necessarily have expected, but someone else said to me, yes, it seemed to work efficiently and effectively and fairly as well. So that was the feedback I had, but you would know better as to whether that worked and in the context of what we do here today, is whether the procedure needed to change, for example.
It seemed to work quite well. I think it was the first time us as a panel had actually done an employee one. Right. We had some training beforehand, before we went into the appeals hearing. I think probably, from my point of view, probably need to be a bit more firm with the appellant. Right. We allow them to probably go a little bit off message sometimes, and well, we're trying to be as fair and open as possible, and we possibly allow them a bit too much rein, perhaps, but I think we were pretty fair to the appellant.
Probably better to go that way.
Yes, to be, you say firm but fair, but you don't want to cut them off. You want them to give you the full what their thing is, or their whole case. This particular appellant didn't have anybody else as a supporting advocate. So they were allowed just to ramble, but just to carry on talking for quite a long time. But we thought we did a fairly fair assessment.
Okay, good. And the fact it's not been challenged is quite positive, I think.
You expressed that in the conclusion as well, that although what he was saying was, we could have empathy for the situation, but really this is what we're here to discuss. We couldn't change.
It's about focus then.
Yeah.
Okay. So process-wise, comfortable?
I think process-wise it was fine.
Yes, useful, because I relay to colleagues if there was a need to change anything. I put in a piece about independent persons as usual, and this year we've got a third member, independent person. Language is a problem. It's great. Fresh person who's dead keen. The others are dead keen, and I've always say to them right at the start, please don't be disappointed that you're not going to have much work to do. Could long may it continue like that. But
Which you might do.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. But what's also useful here to note is the Committee on Standards and Public Life. I suggest you have at least two. And so other councils are going to have to revisit if they take up that idea, because they have one. And I've always said one is not right. It's conflict, inevitably conflict of thinking, let alone. So I'm quite pleased. But it's good that we've got three, and we can make use of them as need be. They know it's going to be required. I've also given you some of their thoughts, because I do have an annual wash-up with them, so I want their take on things so I can feed to you. So I've done that here, and they're quite comfortable with the way things are handled. They don't want to be involved, for example, in the initial assessment stage. We can have a word and just see if we can stop it. members of the council.
So we'll just suspend the meeting briefly while Catherine comes out and tells the work.
Just for 10 minutes, call for a meeting. These new fire safety doors, what you've seen them, and they still have to do bits and bobs. Well done, thank you.
Okay, Catherine enters the room, meeting restarted.
Thank you, Chairman. And so the input of the independent persons is there. They, for example, were interested in the sanctions approach recommended by the Committee on Standards of Public Life. But I think it's important to note they also recognise the impact that could have on councillor numbers. And so there is that worry about if you make it too problematic for councillors, you might not get many. And we do know that it's not easy to recruit, if you like, to the role of councillor. There's a lot of responsibility that goes with it, so it's not so much popular at times. So they had that view on the committee's view, so that was useful. They don't want to be involved in the initial assessment stage, as I said, to keep their independence. But they also like to support the member when they are engaged, to offer that support to the member if the member wants it. They also picked up about parish clerks and the training of. And I think it linked with what they've seen about the neighbourhood planning stuff, for example, that's going on, some of the other complaints, that perhaps that would help. So, and again, it's something I can link with NCALC about. Okay, so that takes me through the main body of the report per se, and the advice that goes with that. If I turn to the appendix in particular, and it's not the recommendations, because I genuinely do not think there's any point in us considering that. It will not matter at this time.
The best practice.
Yeah, it's the best practice recommendation suggestions that will be appropriate to look at. And I've gone through each one. You can see there are 50 made by the committee. And bear in mind that they're pooling information from across the country and there's a lot of variety, etc. So they've made suggestions, I've made comments, and I won't take you through the narrative, but I'll address them, seeing whether there's something that DDC could do at this time. And some of the things we're already doing, which is why I've not suggested we need to do. But if I just take the first one, because it might be something you've got some experience of, Chairman, but it's called for definition of bullying and harassment. I just think that's difficult to do, extremely difficult to do.
It is. I mean, we could possibly put some sort of examples, but then make sure that this isn't an exhaustive list. But then it's difficult.
It's difficult. So for me, it's about having the flexibility that we make a judgment as to whether it does fit with bullying. Is it single incident? Is it cumulative? Is it what? Is it lots of minors? And all the rest of it can be difficult to define. Not because there aren't definitions, there are definitions, but there are plenty of definitions, and there are lots of things that could be caught by it. So the important point for us is we have it in the code. That's the important point for me.
You say here that the word harassment is not referenced specifically,
No.
But would it be possible to say bullying and harassment?
We could make that amendment. I mean, I would take the view actually that's kind of part of it. I mean, but maybe some wiser people who look at this and define the difference. But for me, I could usefully put harassment in a bullying context and make an assessment on that basis. Yeah. For me, it is a form
of bullying. Yes.
So I don't see personally. I've got intimidation noted there. But just so you're clear, the intimidation is in respect of, for example, when it comes to investigations, that's when you'd expect intimidation from our perspective. Again, intimidation, if you like, in the conduct of the member at the authority, whether that may be, could be wrapped up in bullying. So that phraseology was taken from the original code back years ago. So I think it's worked before, and I think it can still work, so I don't have difficulty with that. But I thought I'd just highlight that with you because of what I said earlier about disrespect and how things are getting a little bit sensitive around personal security.
It reflects society in general.
It does. So if I skip through to the second page, if that's all right, but please take me back if you need to, it's not a problem. So top of the page 20, therefore, the authorities code and prominence of it. And I think that's something we can usefully do because when you're sat in the office, you don't automatically go to the website to find things because you've got it to hand almost, haven't you? But I did a bit of that and I thought, I can find it, yeah, that's fine. But I couldn't find it under another section, A to Z. Well, why couldn't I? So I'm thinking, at least do that, for example. The only thing I'd say about prominence is, if the committee were thinking it should be on the because he understands public life, but thinking it should be front page. Every discipline and every subject area and every body out there wants their particular area of work to be on the front page of your website. They're only so big, aren't they? But I think there are ways of making it more prominent. So I'm suggesting we do go with that, and we look at ways of improving that.
Yeah. From the A to Z, that sounds illogical.
Yeah.
Or even when you look for your council and the councillors section,
Yes.
if you can make it more prominent in that. But so we don't want to, well, we want to make it prominent, but it's not going to be the main thing that people are going to look
No,
at.
it's not like bin service, for example, that we've got. So, but there
There is a search box.
is, and that works.
Yeah.
That does work. I suppose.
That will bring up past stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it'll bring up 2018, 2017.
Yes, that's
It'll bring up
right.
wherever that word fits.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So it's, and people have got to know the terminology as well. And I'm conscious of that. I try and look at it as if I didn't know the terminology. Conduct I might put in, behaviour,
Yeah.
something like that I might put in. So it's that sort of thing might be more appropriate to adjust, if you like. And so that's what I'm suggesting on that. And also is part of the suggestion for BP5 there about the notifications included, but their prominence can be a bit greater. So we'll probably look at that as well. Next one's interesting. About publish a clear and straightforward public interest test. You tell me if there is a clear and straightforward one. But you know, we identify things that we will take into account when we issue in our published arrangements. But it's a bit subliminal, as I've put there, that the public interest test is applied. But it is one of the factors that is valid, and I reference it in some of the decisions about. Whilst there's an issue, yeah, okay, but it's not in the wider public interest. Let's go back to my point about internal matter. Okay, it might be displayed to the public in a meeting, but frankly there wasn't anybody there to see it. Yes, they could hear a recording, but that recording, because I listened to some of those, won't tell you that there's a great problem going on. But the point is, I perhaps could bring out the reference I use in the decisions of public interest, a bit more in the arrangements publication that we do issue, and give that a bit more prominence there. But clear and straightforward test is not necessarily easy.
There isn't one really. We've had quite a few training sessions on this sort of thing as to what is and what isn't. There's never been a definitive answer.
I get the sentiment, and perhaps that's what the purpose of that suggestion is, but I don't think we need to do it personally. I don't think it's hindering us. Okay, so the next one's about independent persons I've dealt with. Going down to BP9. Okay, so this is about a decision notice should be published as soon as possible on its website of a decision following investigation. I've got a little concern about this, slightly more than little. Two parts, I suppose. One is, people often take a view there's no smoke without fire. So where something was no further action justified, that person who might have been accused, alleged, could still be potentially thought of as, well, there's no smoke without fire, there must have been something going on, they just don't want to bother to look at it. And I don't think that's fair on that person necessarily. I also think there's a slight difficulty with some of the confidentiality these days, GDPR and all that stuff. So I'm a bit wary of that. And I actually think general public don't need to know about those matters per se, about individuals, if when it comes to no further action. And I contrast that when we do have an investigation that requires a hearing, because we have hearings in public, and the thing is then hearing. That's not the employee hearings, that's different. But what I do think could be useful, just as I supply these to you, the redacted versions, actually we could include those on the website.
I mean, where there is a hearing, there are parts of hearings that are public and parts of hearings that are in camera.
And we do break out, that's right, for some
And so under those circumstances, surely the stuff that is declared in the public meeting could be available, could be made available. The stuff that is in camera probably couldn't.
Yeah, the hearing material will always be available
Yeah.
on the website, etc. That's always available.
I mean, but that's not...
But the in-camera stuff...
The in-camera stuff is obviously in camera.
Yeah, but what we need to reflect in the minutes of such hearings is what happened and what was decided, etc. And what it does, it gives the space, doesn't it, to the panel to consider.
And that's why I asked the fact, if it's been in camera, there isn't need to redact the stuff that was in the public arena.
Yeah, so stuff that wasn't in the public arena, we need to be careful.
It has to be redacted. Stuff that was in the public domain is in the public domain.
That's absolutely fine. But these ones where there's no further action, which is the most usual outcome, because some of the things are just not appropriate or they're not in the capacity of councillor. That's the important point often. There's no reason why those can't be also giving the public a flavour of what's going on. What I would need to do, I think, is state that in our view, 11, for example, this year, or whether it's 20, whatever, are low numbers. Because people might think, oh, there's 11 of those, blimey, that's a lot of people. Actually, it's not. In a number of meetings, councils, councillors, exchanges, etc., etc., it's rather small.
I mean, the significance surely is the fact that there may be 11 or there may be a larger number. The significance in which of them have is found there any justification, isn't it?
Yeah, and the seriousness of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, some of those complaints could be vexatious.
I mean, I have no doubt about the fact that I go off tangent here, but I think you'll understand the point, that in this day of social media, complaints about everything are out of all proportion. And I'm rather surprised that we can retain the number at such a low level, especially in this day and age of social media, where almost anything you say, anything you do, or any time that you roll off the straight and narrow is on somebody's camera. So, I mean, I'm very pleased with that.
And to be honest, I think the vehicle that people think is the best resolution is social media, actually. And that's also unfortunate because it's not appropriate.
Yes. I mean, compared to other similar sized councils, have you done any benchmarking?
Yeah.
What sort of numbers they tend to get?
In Northamptonshire especially, we have this conversation quite frequently on various Munchen officer meetings. And the numbers are similar. There is one council that's got quite a few more, but kind of akin to what we have. It usually emanates from a few parish councils where there are known issues, known conflicts. So that can be the problem. I don't think nationally there's a great number, but there will be councils that have got real problems and real parishes with problems. And there are some celebrated cases, going back to your point about the seriousness point, there are some out there who are just absolutely outrageous. And the problem is the sanctions. And they've been subject to some court cases now. So you can never quite judge just from the number, that's a fair point. But as someone who's been doing this for some years now, it is a reflection of generally good governance around. And the danger of just producing it bluntly is that people think, oh, there's lots of problems going on. Because the media might not pick that stuff up to make something of it. You know, if it's out there, then they obviously have every right to do that. But the redaction is important because then you don't necessarily label a council or a council.
I think it's good that people feel that they can and that it gets looked into, that it gets taken seriously, rather than, because if there was nothing and nothing was public, I would, someone that doesn't understand this sort of thing would probably go, what are they hiding? What's not, perception.
It's all covered up. Yeah, that's true.
I think the openness is good.
So it will help. I mean,
you can't help what media might spin because media can spin anything.
Yeah, because you can't control necessarily what a complainant might do when they first put forward a complaint, because they might have been talking to anybody left, right, centre, might have gone to the media. And I've often had that put to me that, well, I'm going to go to the media.
Yeah.
The media might say, I'm not interested. I don't know, but it could be out there. That's the point, isn't it? Yeah. So if you're happy with that, that's the suggestion I've made. Okay, so other things we've done and complied with. Did we do that? It's on page 22 now. EP14. Okay, there's recommendations about reporting on separate bodies. Well, that's not really necessarily a matter for us per se as a standards committee, if you like. It's more a matter for authorities in general. But it does apply where you've got things like we have TDEC or NOS. It's this kind of relationship, and it is a bit of a grey area in many ways, and it's across the nation as well. But you've got these bodies that councils are aligned with, joint ventures or whatever they might be. How do you strictly ensure the governance and the standards? But then again, they've been set up separately to act separately. And so you've got to kind of respect that as well. If you're going to make them separate, they've got to act in the way they've been set up. And so, for example, with companies, you set up companies, the first obligation of directors is to serve the company. So there's always going to be this potential conflict, and that's where the local authority world has changed over the decades. It was either, wasn't it? It was either public service or completely free market. It tends to have this blend now, I think, and that's where you get some of these grey areas coming from.
Well, when one reads articles and memorandums of companies, I'm afraid that is resolved, because the articles and memorandums of company report the fact that your first duty is always to the company.
Absolutely, absolutely. So sometimes the member can feel a little bit caught between the two, but they are reminded by the officer personnel, if you like, or their whatever staff they have, that yes, that very point, the company rules are you serve the company. Okay, in a good spirited way is what we like to think happened. That's why it counts as on. Okay. So, EP15 is about routine meetings with critical group leaders.
I like the response on this one.
Yeah,
I like the comment, yeah.
So I think there's ways to deal with that.
Yeah.
Deal with it.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's an issue there. So that is my journey for you through the...
May I make a comment on that document, please, Chairman?
Yes, certainly.
I just want to say that I think that the best practice proposals are very, very sensible. I think that your responses are very, very thorough and very, very pertinent. I think they tend to show that the work that we've put in on this committee over the course of the years and the governance that standards that you've maintained put us in a very, very good spot. And I think it's an excellent report, and I think what you've written and the way you've put things together is outstanding. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll second or third that.
Thank you very much. And with the help of Catherine, I will say, particularly, she not only does the minutes, she does some of the background work for my reports and the like.
With everything.
Catherine is the real voice behind it. Yeah.
So if you're happy, Chairman, the advice I've put before you reflects what I've gone through.
Yeah.
The annual report is a positive record of what's happening in the area. Suggestions I've put the Committee on Standards Public Life be supported, as I've put forward. Mystery shopping continues. Learning and development session in the right time. And the key messages for the parishes to be put together as per usual and issued. I'll be happy with that.
Yeah. That's a resolved item.
That would be a resolved item if you agree.
Yeah. Any further comments on that? No, I think we're perfectly happy with that. Right, well, moving on then to the next item, which is number 5, which is a record of complaints and record of Daventry District Council dispensations.
And this is simply a record, Chairman. We put this on to give a bit more flesh to the bones of the report I've just done. But of course we also have got the redacted versions that have gone to you as committee members and persons. So the public can see a little bit more, perhaps, than is in the main narrative. So that's why we've always done this. But a little bit, you see the commentary I put in is more than what you'd get in the main report. People can see this amount of information, but it is very high level and doesn't tell you the ins and outs, perhaps a bit more juicy stuff that someone would get from a redacted version.
Yeah.
So it's kind of recording rather than informing, if you like, the public. But it's there, and so it gives you the better flavour as well when you come to committee of what's been said in the main report. You can see, for example, it's all about parish councils, for example. And you can see the types of issues that are being raised. That's what I've summarised in the report. But
I'm just wondering, when we were talking earlier on about making it more, that these redacted copies more available, would it be a good idea perhaps to put a hyperlink in somewhere in this report on the minutes, so you can whiz to the actual bit of information relating to a particular complaint? Or?
I wouldn't do that for minutes of this meeting, as we as a prescribed will do minutes.
Yeah.
But I thought what you were going to suggest was, rather just being left here in the papers, if you like, and of course the agenda is always able to be accessed from say. I could actually, when we put this up on the website, we could put this summary ahead of it, and then they can look at the detail if they wish. They can get the summary and the detail together. I don't see a difficulty with that. This is already out there, obviously, but the prominence would be satisfied, perhaps.
Just make it a little bit easier to navigate around.
That would have been enormously helpful. when we received the redacted copies,
Well, there you go.
had we had this ahead of the redacted copies, I think it would have made the reading of the
Yeah, that's what I
of the
said.
cases a little. I think that one had to work through the redacted copies and build a picture instead of starting here with a picture and then getting chapter and verse. So I agree that would be enormously helpful.
So we're happy to do
I
that.
agree
Alison.
that it's already out there, but just to make everything more simple and have stuff just there like that.
We are in that world, aren't
We are in that world there.
It's doing instant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
The only caveat to that, if I may, is that what you've got here is what is necessarily to put on the agenda for this meeting. We only meet annually. I would like to send, I have done it before, I've sent the redacted notices out 6 monthly. So I wouldn't want to hold up the production of those if I think I've only committed to annually in here, but if we could do them in 6 monthly, because we have quite a volume, I'd prefer to still get them to you, even if it's ahead of this. But the final batch of what we could do next time perhaps is, if it is an annual, or if it's the second of the 6 months, before we issue that, we have this compiled, and it goes with that set of redacted notices to you. So you've got that as well. So that's why I've just got to be conscious of. I don't want to. It's a bit like what I said about the routine meetings point. I don't want to wait for a set time. If there's something perhaps you would find of interest during the year, better to have it than wait for the annual meeting to get the schedule that you would normally get. But I don't want to necessarily have to produce this in a growing version. We'd like to be able to just produce the summary back. But you can still get those quite readily. We produce those, and it's a bit of a chore to go through and redact, but yeah, that's easy enough.
It will be like a summary at the end of the year.
Summary at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there will be something.
Yeah.
To help with that, I understand. Ahead of the committee, because it's really important. The reason I send it to you is not for getting a response straight away, it's to actually feed into this committee. That's the whole idea of it. And so it would help for that purpose, as you said, to put the two together. Okay. So it's for recording and noting, therefore, and that's all.
Yes, okay, so we've noted that. Great, okay. Let's on to the final item here, which is item 6, urgent business. Is there any...
I've got 4 items. No.
I'd be surprised if you did, but yeah. No, nothing on.
Yeah.
Right, okay, well that formally concludes the meeting for tonight. So thank you very much everybody for coming, and we'll see you again back, well, roughly this time next year.
We will be. We'll still be here.
Yeah, you see, we'll still